Hello everyone, welcome to the 13th episode of the Crush Cash Game series, lucky number 13. We start out with Ace Jack off at the top left table. The 1 seat had limped in and the 4 seat had isolated to 4x instead of just 3-betting him like we would do with some hands that are in the bottom of our range. In this particular spot, we decided to flat because the ace jack is way ahead of his isolating range, and we also want to invite the 1 seed in, who appears to be, quite fishy. So we flop an ace, turn an ace, pretty good. The small blind did lead out for a very small amount, like half pot, so I wouldn't expect him to have too many super strong hands in his range, and he also bet about half pot on the turn as well. So our perceived range should have a lot of aces in it. I don't know exactly what he thinks he's folding out, but maybe if we had a pocket pair like trays and fours would be about the only hands that he could fold out with a river bet there. But and as always, he had initiative. We had a good hand, but if we raise on the turn, we really force out a lot of his air balls, and we want him to continue bluffing with zero equity type hands like the one that he had. Limping the king 8 suited, getting 7-1 on our money. Really annoying getting squeezed from the big blind in this spot. I hate giving away money from the small blind. But it looks like he got action from the 4 seat, which is going to be tough for the 4 seat to really rep anything, being the second limper on the button. If they had a good hand, they would have wanted to isolate the limper. So, I mean, at best here, like on an ace-high board, especially, they're not really repping much of anything at all because most aces are going to isolate. I would think he has some sort of suited connector or pocket pair type hand. And I would expect the 1 seat to probably have some aces in his range, along with, if he was squeezing with kings or queens, maybe king jack, queen jack type things, but just had a bad ace. And the 4 seat decided to take its stab at the pot, but it wasn't a very credible stab, and they're just burning money in that spot for the most part against a thinking player. Pocket 9s at the top right. Easy cutoff open. Peeling with a tray 5 suited at the bottom right. This is a board we're going to check raise. We do have some equity. It's pretty tough for them to hit. The 9s getting squeezed by the short stack. This is going to be expected. Short stacks love squeezing. They love getting their stack in. I think the 9s, there's no thinking. Like we're crushing their squeeze range. We want to get it in. We don't want to invite the 1 seat along behind us with 9s. With all that being said, squeeze happy little short stacks also get aces, and they sure do love squeezing with aces as well and getting some light action. Not that the 9s were particularly light or light at all, but just in general, they're gonna be able to get it in fairly often in that situation. good spot with the ace-8. The 3 seed is playing way too many hands, and they're not playing them very aggressively at all. Just playing pretty passive. So we want to take a lot of flops in position versus him, because we're going to be able to extract a lot of value out of him over time. We flopped top set at the bottom left and decided to get tricky and check it back. I think this is just a fancy play syndrome type play. There's no real sense in checking it back. I think we can just bet and get played back at with way worse. A lot of the hands that do have equity aren't going to have a chance to realize their equity, like the 8s. If we bet the flop, it's unlikely that the 8s continue, but it's also unlikely that we get a bet out of them in the future. So we did happen to get a small bet out of them, but I think in general raising there is just got to be correct. Turning a 9 high flush at the top right table. Betting out was probably the right thing to do, but I was busy messing with my HUD and messing with the chat and everything, and timed out. The hazards of making everything look pretty for you guys. Small C bet at the bottom right table with the 6s. Small because if we do call the all-in from the 4 seed, we want him to be able to put the last bet in, because it's hard for us to put the last bet in and get called by a hand that we're beating. So the only way to get it in versus a worse hand is to let them put the last bet in. Top left table looks pretty good. We have a new player who seems like he might be a fish. The 1 seed is a weak player. At the bottom right, the 4 seed's a weak player. At the top right, the 2 seed is a very weak player. So possibly the 4 seed as well at the top right, although after 9 hands, you can't always make a very good judgment on such a small sample size. My stats have looked pretty wacky after sometimes as many as 30 hands. One thing that I've noticed when I've dropped down and played the lower limits lately, the lower limits, I've been seeing regulars who are opening minimum on the button against, and I've done it too. And when I've played sessions at $50 no limit, let's look at this Jack's hand. Aggressive opponent. With the fish and the blinds, we opted to flat with the jacks instead of 3-betting and take a flop in position with a dominating hand. I actually like that better than 3-betting and isolating myself against that player away from the fish, because we always want to invite the fish to play with hands that are dominated. Post flop, they're likely to make more mistakes. The 4 seed just bet against us with the queen jack. We did not raise him with trip aces. It's sort of interesting because he makes the same small bet here, which leads me to believe he doesn't have a super strong hand. But is he going to continue firing away after we just called him down with a hand like king queen that bricks on the river. I don't really know, and I wouldn't want to count on it and let him realize his equity with a king queen type hand and then just never bet the river unless he actually gets there. So putting a raise in here, a small raise that can look like we're trying to get the showdown freely, or something like that, or maybe he's gonna look at it like we have some sort of draw, or picked up some sort of pair and a flush draw or combo draw, something like that. I go back and forth on to whether or not I should raise there, but I think in the end raising can't be that bad, especially given the fact that we just called him down and he just got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. So I would think that would make him less inclined to bluff in the future. King Jack at the bottom left. We're going to raise the limp by the weak player all day long in position. 7-9 off is an interesting spot because the 4-seat bet out 3 ways, which makes me believe they have something. And a lot of the somethings out there are pairs with straight draws. We have a 7 blocker, so it's fairly unlikely that he has a 7. So we're raising right here to check back the river. We're giving him a chance to call with hands that we beat. And even if he does have a 7, it's puts him in a tough spot. So our raise on the turn accomplishes a couple of goals. We get to get better hands to fold. We get to get worse hands to call. And this is not a good river for us. We're just going to check it back. Consider turning our hand into a bluff, but no real point. I think that he has a decent amount of 5s in his range, and I think that he checks them as well. As it turned out, he had a monster draw. But ended up with a pair of 7s with an 8 kicker. Unfortunately for him, we had a pair of 7s with a 9 kicker. That's what they told you back in the day, right? He had kicker problems. The Jack's hand that we just folded at the bottom right, there's really nothing we can do after raising in second position, getting 3-bet, and then getting cold 4-bet. It's just a sucky spot. Sucky spot with not much information. Just going to pitch them, and if anything develops, like we see that these guys are nuts, then we'll adjust our range. But I would say that typically just piling in jacks there is going to be a losing play. The old king 8 off under the gun limp. Gotta love that. Pretty wild that, you know, over 10 years past the poker boom, it's still, players like that are still out there. I would say for the most part, poker has gotten, the learning curve is pretty steep for beating No Limit Holdem, because even the amateurs and the weak players know a ton. They know way more than the amateurs and weak players of 10 years ago and 20 years ago. I mean, forget about it. Like, those were the days where you could play a, 7 VP, 4 pre-flop raise and still just smash everybody. And that's, when you get into the the heuristics, you should play hands X, Y, and Z under the gun, no other hands ever. Like, that creates a problem. That you have to be able to adjust. You have to be able to evolve your game to go deeper into the decision tree where there's still profit. Even if players aren't making huge mistakes pre-flop anymore, they are still going to make mistakes down the line, and that's when we really need to capitalize on it. Raising to 20 after the limper with the 10-8 suited. I would think that if he limps there, he's raising any good hand, so he just doesn't have many good hands. The weird thing about limpers in that particular spot, like, for whatever reason, they won't raise 3x, but they'll limp call 5x. For the most part, they play pretty fit or fold after the flop, and a c-bet will get the job done. But yeah, when you just look at a chart and say, I'm going to play these hands from this position, I'm going to 3-bet these hands from the small blind, the button, etc., and your game's not flexible, you don't evolve, you aren't capable of looking at the game flow and changing your style up, you're really missing out on opportunities to make money. Cold 4-betting the king 4 suited, I think that's perfectly reasonable considering the 3-bet. The 3-seat has been 3-betting 29% of his hands. He seems to be just a wild guy. And yeah, so how'd that work out for us? Obviously, we're folding the king 4. I did look this hand up. He had jacks, so I don't think it should be exceptionally profitable for him to just pile in jacks after getting cold 4-bet, assuming that he doesn't know it's me cold 4-betting. In general, cold 4-bets are a pretty powerful play. They're a strong move. I guess I do have ace king in my cold 4-bet range, and after cold 4-betting ace king, we're calling it off, obviously. But lots of players, they're not going to cold 4-bet tens. They're going to cold 4-bet aces, kings, queens, and ace king. And against that range, jacks are not doing particularly well. Some people may not even cold 4-bet ace king off. They may just flat the 3-bet cold. Limping behind with the ace-6 suited. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's bad not to always isolate the 4-seat. We can invite other people along behind us, and we have the benefit of getting to see the 4-seat call and isolate before we call. I think our hand plays pretty well. We can do some pretty cool things post flop. Our limp allowed the king 4 suited to get in there and double up, so he should be thanking us. Or maybe he would have just called the raise anyway, and we would have wasted $20 or $16. Very likely he would have just called the raise. Pretty interesting with the 4-seat at the bottom left having $8.50 and the 3-seat isolating. You got to think that he has some sort of hand that has value simply because he knows that the 4-seat's going to be coming along for the ride no matter what. So I would think the 3-seat actually has not the worst hand. Ace 4 suited plus and ace 8 off plus. But with him checking it down, he probably just has a bad ace. Ace 4 suited. Isolating the ace 7 at the top right. Our villain is playing over 50% of his hands, folding to continuation bets 80% of the time. This is a spot that I don't see very often at the mid stakes, but at the lower stakes happens somewhat frequently, where players will limp call raises and then fold on flops. 3-betting the deuce 5 suited at the bottom left. Did not work out for us. Got limp raise from the cutoff. Pretty annoying. But yeah, when players are folding to c-bet so often and they're playing so many hands and they're out of position, you can really raise and isolate any 2 cards and make 7 deuce off profitable from the button in that particular situation. This is why what I was saying earlier about the heuristics, and you should never play hand X, you should never do X with hand Y. I don't agree with them. I see their place, because they give people basically a strategy guide to be able to beat poker, but there's no room for creativity. There's no room for thinking outside of the box, which is one thing that I love about poker. I love the fact that, you know, I get to do some things that may or may not work out, and you know, that's exciting to me. At the top left, I'm not particularly pleased with my river play on this hand. I think the turn play is fine, because the flop, our villain only bet about half pot. We think that doesn't mean he has a super strong hand, and then he changes on the turn. He ups his bet size, which in a lot of cases I feel like he picks up a draw. The biggest problem is that once he calls our raise, I don't think he calls the turn with a lot of draws. So I think he has something, whether it be he turned a set of 6s, he turned 2 pair, or he happened to make a flush. And I don't like going to battle versus the top of people's ranges, and that was a pretty clear mistake on my part. I don't mind how I played the turn at all, but the river was just a spew. But yeah, when and we got a pretty fortunate spot with the aces against ace king off. But yeah, I don't like being put in a box and told that I should always do this, because most of the really great winning players, and I'm not saying that that's me particularly, I'm just saying that, you know, the Tom Dwans, the Phil Ivies, the Phil Galfons, all of the great players are tricky. They think outside the box. They implement 150% pot size bets or 15% pot size bets. They do things that people don't always expect and don't know how to react to, and that helps them. That helps them create their edge, and the more comfortable you get in doing little wacky things, then the more comfortable you are in those spots when they inevitably come up, because you're creating them basically. And so you feel more comfortable, your opponent doesn't feel as comfortable. That's always the situation you want to create. I played against a guy at 2040, no limit, live, and he took it a little extreme, but I beat him out of a couple of pots, and he 3-bet me for every single hand for about 4 hours. Every time I opened, I got 3-bet. and that's a little extreme because but he was very comfortable in playing 3-bet pots and with position, and he could with position and depth, and he could tell that I probably wasn't. So he just wanted to put me in that spot as often as possible. The thing that was kind of the thing that he didn't really realize was it was making him profitable against me, but it was making the rest of the table profitable against him. It's just very hard to win using that strategy. So, unfortunately, we bricked off with the 8-10 of spades at the top right. I'm pretty sure the 2-seat had a great hand. He 3-bet us very small pre and then checked the flop. Just more than likely going to have sets and 2-pair type hands. I looked the hand up. He did have ace queen, so he had top 2-pair and really created a great spot for us to hit a backdoor spade or a backdoor 9 to make our straight. But yeah, the point is put people in spots where they're uncomfortable and they are unfamiliar. And there's a lot of fear in doing that for the first time, but the more often that you do it, the more comfortable you get. The bottom left, isolating the queen 8 off. This guy's just playing way too many hands and he's playing them poorly, so we want to isolate as often as we can. I expect to get 3-bet here, fairly light by the 6-seat. We could 4-bet. It looks like we are going to 4-bet. I think it's a great spot for a 4-bet bluff. It's just a situation of knowing what our opponents are thinking. He's thinking that I'm isolating him super light, which we are. So he's going to 3-bet us light. So if he's going to be 3-betting us light, then we're going to 4-bet him light. And just play our little game of chicken. Last person who puts the money in the pot wins. I think it's worth noting that when we do 4-bet light or 4-bet bluff and do things like that, we make our decision fairly quickly. We don't time all the way down thinking about it. We want to make it seem like there wasn't much to think about. Again, at the bottom right, going to be cold 4-betting the king queen off. The 2-seat is very aggressive. He 3-bet, less than 3x, which isn't a great indicator of a strong hand to me. As backup, king queen is going to have some equity post flop if he does opt to call, which I don't think he does super often, but when he does flat us, we do have a little bit of backup, more than queen 8 off, for instance. And we're also playing, our image at that table is somewhat on the tight side, 22%, 22-19. I wouldn't think he would suspect we're cold 4-betting pretty light there. Whoop. Pretty good run out for aces. Not so good for the 9 tray though. Looks like we got about 1 minute left in this video. I want to thank you all again for watching my videos. I really hope that you're gaining some knowledge. I hope your game is improving, and I hope I'm making you money. Again, isolating the 4 seed with the ace-4 suited. One seed's a brand new player, so don't really know what sort of range to expect here. I would think he has a lot of pocket pairs and probably even some ace highs. Yeah. Should have continued betting the turn there, but what can you do? Thank you again. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Lucky number 13. Take care, everybody.